On the morning of April 12, 1998, 25 high school seniors climbed aboard a bus for what should have been an ordinary field trip to a history museum in Dallas, Texas. Parents waved, teachers checked attendance, and the bus rolled away from their small town. They never came back. For over 2 decades, the disappearance of the 25 has haunted Meadowbrook, Texas. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers. Until now. If you're drawn to stories where buried secrets resurface decades later, subscribe. The first scream came from the sky. It was April 1998, a warm spring morning that smelled faintly of cut grass and diesel fuel. The yellow school bus idled in front of Meadowbrook High, its engine chugging like an impatient animal. 25 seniors, jittery with the energy of youth and the promise of escape, piled onto the vehicle with backpacks, Walkmans, disposable cameras, and the half-lazy chatter of students who believed life was infinite. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with thinning hair, leaned out the window to shout at the stragglers. "Let's go! If we don't hit the road, you'll miss the museum tour." His voice was rough, but not unkind. Parents gathered at the curb, waving, taking photographs. Margaret Doyle lifted her camcorder, capturing her son Luke grinning with his friends at the bus door. "Bye, Mom," he called, his voice carried on the warm breeze. The bus lurched forward. The students cheered. Dust rose from the gravel as the yellow beast carried them away. By noon, Meadowbrook was quiet again. Only the faint squeak of a swing set on the playground reminded anyone that a group of teenagers had once filled the morning with laughter. They were supposed to arrive in Dallas by 2 o'clock. At 3, when the teacher who had arranged the field trip called the museum, she was told the group had never arrived. At 4, the principal phoned the bus company. At 5, parents stood in the school lobby, voices raised, demanding answers. By nightfall, search parties combed the highways. Helicopters circled. Officers shone flashlights into ditches. Nothing. The bus had vanished. 23 years later, the case was little more than a scar on the town's collective memory. Meadowbrook had shrunk. Businesses had closed. People moved away, unwilling to breathe the air of a place that had swallowed their children. But for some, the wound never closed. Detective Claire Whitman had been 12 when the 25 disappeared. She remembered the news crews swarming her neighborhood, the mothers clutching each other, the fathers scanning the horizon like they could will the bus to reappear. One of the missing was her cousin, Emma. They'd shared sleepovers, secrets, whispered about college and the future. Emma's smile still appeared in Claire's dreams. Now, in 2014, Claire was a seasoned investigator with the Texas Rangers, specializing in cold cases. She'd handled murders, kidnappings, fraud. But when the Meadowbrook file landed on her desk, thick, yellowed with age, stuffed with contradictory reports, she felt something more than duty. She felt compulsion. On a rain-slick Thursday afternoon, she sat at her desk in Austin, flipping through black and white photos. The faces of the missing stared back at her. Emma with her wild curls, Luke Doyle with his crooked grin, twins Sarah and Susan Harper holding hands. Their eyes were alive in the photographs, as if frozen mid-laugh. Claire tapped her pen against the edge of the file. There had been whispers recently. A construction crew clearing land outside Meadowbrook had unearthed something. The sheriff's office was being tight-lipped, but Claire's contact hinted at vehicle fragments. Her pulse quickened. The bus. For years, the working theories had ranged from the plausible to the absurd. A hijacking gone wrong. A cult abduction. The bus plunging into a hidden sinkhole. Government cover-up. Every parent had their own version, their own private hell. Claire stood, raincoat in hand, and made her decision. She would drive to Meadowbrook tonight, the town where it all began. They drove through back roads slick with rain, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. Hollis's truck smelled faintly of tobacco. Neither spoke much until they pulled onto a muddy track that led to a clearing. Floodlights illuminated heavy machinery, piles of dirt, and orange tape marking the perimeter. Claire stepped out into the rain. Her boots sank into the mud. A deputy lifted the tape for her. And there it was. Half buried in clay, twisted almost beyond recognition, was a fragment of yellow metal. A curve of siding. A window frame still clinging to shards of glass. Claire crouched, running her gloved fingers over the rust. The paint flaked beneath her touch, but beneath the decay she saw it clearly. The faded outline of black letters. D4-5. Her breath caught. District 45. It was real. The ground had shifted. The past was pushing itself back into the present. And Claire knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that finding the bus was only the beginning. Because if the bus had been buried all these years, what else lay beneath the earth? Morning in Meadowbrook broke gray and damp. Fog clung to the highway's shoulders, and rainwater still dripped from oak branches lining the two-lane roads. Claire sat in a rental car outside the only diner in town, staring through the windshield at the neon sign flickering open, in red letters that seemed tired of burning. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. Two farmers hunched over coffee mugs, and a waitress in her 60s moved between tables with the practiced slowness of someone who had seen decades come and go without surprise. Claire slid into a booth by the window. Her notepad lay open, already cluttered with questions. She ordered black coffee and toast, though her stomach had no appetite. She couldn't stop thinking about the fragment of yellow metal buried in the clay. It was the first tangible proof in over 20 years that the bus hadn't simply evaporated. Her training told her to remain cautious. Evidence could mislead. Coincidences could masquerade as breakthroughs. But, deep down, she felt it. The case had cracked open. The bell over the diner door jingled. A man in his late 40s entered, tall and angular, wearing a jacket with a sheriff's patch. His face was weathered. Eyes red-rimmed like sleep rarely visited him. Sheriff Hollis spotted her and approached. "Morning," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Morning," Claire replied. "You'll forgive me if I don't leap for joy over last night's discovery," he muttered, signaling for coffee. "Half this town will be clawing at us for answers. They've lived with ghosts too long. That's why I'm here," Claire said. Hollis studied her, eyes narrowing. "You're related to one of the kids, aren't you?" "My cousin," she admitted. "Emma." He nodded slowly. "Figured. You've got that look. The ones who lost somebody always do." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Claire broke the quiet. What was the official conclusion back then? Off the record, Hollis exhaled. "No conclusion." That was the problem. No skid marks on the road, no wreckage in rivers, no signs of struggle. One second that bus was on Highway 281. The next, it wasn't. People blamed me, blamed the school, blamed the driver. Hell, some said the kids staged it themselves, ran away. He shook his head. But 25? All at once. Doesn't happen. "Tell me about the driver," Claire pressed. "Robert Keene. Drove for the district 10 years. Wife, 2 kids. Clean record. He went missing too. Never resurfaced. So he was either a victim," Claire said slowly, "or part of it." "Depends who you ask," Hollis replied. "His family swore he'd never hurt those kids. Others." Not so sure, Claire scribbled notes, though her mind lingered on Emma's face in those school photos. She remembered her cousin's laugh, the way she chewed pens when thinking. It was surreal to picture her last moments inside that bus. The waitress brought their coffee. Hollis stirred in cream while Claire asked, "Where was the bus last seen?" He hesitated, then said, "Security cam at a gas station on 281 caught them filling up. Timestamp, 11:47 a.m., April 12th, 1998. After that, Nothing. And the fragments we found. Construction crew was digging foundations for a new subdivision about 5 miles east of that stretch. Land used to be ranch country, long abandoned. Ground shifts out here. If the bus was buried, maybe erosion brought it closer to the surface. Claire's pulse quickened. I want to see the footage. Hollis gave a bitter chuckle. On VHS, recorded over 6 times. Grainy as hell. But it's in the archives. I'll have a deputy pull it. Claire leaned forward. Sheriff, if the bus was buried deliberately, that suggests planning. A cover-up. Someone in this town knows something. His jaw tightened. You think I haven't thought that every day for 23 years? They drank in silence after that. Later that morning, Claire drove to Meadowbrook High. The building still stood, though its bricks were sun-faded and vines clung to the gymnasium walls. The school had fewer students now. Whole sections of hallway were locked, classrooms unused. Inside, the air smelled of dust and bleach. Trophies lined a glass case, their brass plates tarnished. Among them, a row of framed photographs caught her eye. Class portraits from 1998. She studied the faces. Emma smiling. Luke Doyle flashing his trademark grin. Sarah and Susan Harper, identical down to their dimples. A whole generation trapped in these photos, immortalized the year they vanished. A voice startled her. You're Claire Whitman, aren't you? She turned. A man in his 50s stood nearby, holding a stack of papers. His tie was crooked, his hair graying at the temples. Yes, she said cautiously. I'm Mark Reynolds, vice principal. Was a teacher back when it happened. His voice carried weight, as though each word had to crawl through years of sorrow. Claire introduced herself. I'm reopening the case. I'd like to ask about the day of the trip. Reynolds' eyes flickered to the photographs. I remember every second. The kids were buzzing with excitement. Robert Keene was early, as always. They loaded up, waved, and drove off. That was the last time we saw them. Did anyone seem unusual? Nervous? Anything that stood out? He paused, thinking. Nothing obvious, but looking back. He swallowed. Emma seemed quieter than usual. Kept glancing over her shoulder. I thought it was test stress. Now I wonder. Claire's heart thudded. Did she say anything? No. Just a sense, you know? Like she knew something was coming. She wrote the note down, though her hand trembled. Reynolds shifted the papers in his hands. Every anniversary, parents gather in the gym. They light candles. 25 flames, one for each. You should come tonight. It helps to... Remember. Claire nodded. She would go. The day wore on. Claire visited the town library, combed through old newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed, 25 students, driver vanish. Widespread search yields no clues. Meadowbrook grieves. One article caught her eye. A witness statement from a trucker who swore he saw the bus turn off the highway near an abandoned ranch. Investigators had dismissed it as unreliable. The man had been drinking, his story inconsistent. But now, with the fragments found east of that very stretch, the details seemed chillingly relevant. Claire photocopied the article, highlighting the ranch location. Evening descended. The gymnasium lights glowed through frosted windows as townspeople filed inside. Claire slipped into a seat near the back. On the stage, 25 candles burned. Parents and siblings read names aloud. Some wept openly. Others stood silent, hollowed by grief that had calcified over decades. When Emma's name was spoken, Claire's throat closed. She remembered their last sleepover. Emma painting her nails while they talked about prom dresses. Emma had promised Claire she'd lend her shoes. They never made it to prom. Sheriff Hollis spoke briefly, his voice hoarse. We've uncovered new evidence. We can't promise answers, but we promise we'll keep looking. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hope was a dangerous drug, but they drank it anyway. After the ceremony, an older woman approached Claire. Her face was lined, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "You're Emma's cousin, aren't you?" "Yes," Claire said softly. The woman gripped her hand. "I'm Ruth Harper." The twins' mother, Claire's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry for your loss." Ruth's voice lowered. "Don't let them bury this again. People here, they keep secrets. Someone knows where our children are. Don't let them get away with silence." Her hand trembled as she released Claire's. And just like that, Claire knew this investigation would not only be about evidence or old files, it would be about breaking through the wall of silence that had suffocated Meadowbrook for decades. That night, back at the motel, Claire pinned photocopies, photos, and notes across the wall. The bus fragment, the trucker's testimony, Emma's unease that morning. She stared at the pieces, trying to force them into a picture, but the picture refused to form. And outside her window, in the damp silence of Meadowbrook, the town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for old secrets to rise from the ground. The construction site was quiet at dawn. The floodlights had been shut off, leaving only a thin haze of sunlight pushing through the mist. Bulldozers and backhoes sat idle, their metal arms frozen mid-motion like prehistoric beasts caught in amber. The ground was soft from yesterday's rain, mud clinging to boots and tires. Claire arrived early, coffee in one hand, notepad in the other. She passed under yellow tape strung loosely between poles and found Sheriff Hollis already there, standing with a small crew of deputies. He looked tired, his uniform wrinkled, but his posture was rigid. "Morning," he said. "They're bringing in ground-penetrating radar. We need to know if more of the bus is down there." Claire nodded. Her gaze drifted to the patch of earth where she'd seen the yellow fragment last night. Workers had cleared more of the soil since then, exposing a longer section of curved metal, unmistakably the side of a bus. Her chest tightened. It was real. A deputy jogged over, carrying a tablet that displayed blurred, gray-toned images. "Radar sweep shows a large object beneath the surface. Rough dimensions match a full-sized bus." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Start digging," Hollis ordered. The hours dragged as the backhoe scooped soil, each pass slow and careful. Claire stood at the edge, mud seeping into her boots, watching layer after layer of earth peeled back. And then, a dull, hollow clang. The bucket had struck metal. Workers scrambled to clear the rest by hand, shovels slicing into wet soil. Slowly, the roofline of the bus emerged, coated in rust and clay. Windows gaped empty, jagged edges of glass still clinging to their frames. Claire felt her throat tighten. 25 students and a driver had once sat inside this shell. The workers pried open the emergency exit at the rear. A gush of foul-smelling air escaped, thick with mold and rust. One man gagged, pulling his shirt over his face. Claire slipped on gloves and crouched low, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness of the bus interior, illuminating torn vinyl seats, collapsed aisles, and a thin film of silt covering everything. She crawled inside. The silence was deafening. Her light swept across the seats. Numbers were still faintly visible on the backs, painted decades ago. Dust motes swirled like ghosts. At seat 14, she froze. There was something lodged between the cushions, a small, brittle object coated in dirt. Carefully, she pried it free. It was a shoe, tiny, white, with a faded rainbow embroidered along the side. The kind a child might wear to school in 1998. Claire's heart hammered. Behind her, Hollis's voice echoed into the bus. "What did you find?" She held up the shoe, his face drained of color. News spread fast. By afternoon, reporters had gathered at the perimeter, cameras flashing. Hollis addressed them briefly, confirming only that remains of the vehicle have been located and that the investigation is ongoing. Inside the makeshift command tent, Claire examined the shoe under proper lighting. The size was small, maybe a women's 6. Inside the tongue, Faint ink marks were still visible. 2 letters written in permanent marker. E.H. Emma Hallbrug. Claire's stomach twisted. It was her cousin's shoe. She remembered Emma begging her mother for them at the mall, insisting the rainbow stripes made her run faster. Emma had worn them everywhere. To class, to the park, even at their last sleepover. Now here they were, pulled from the tomb of a buried bus. Claire set the shoe down carefully, her hands trembling. She forced herself to breathe. She was an investigator. She had to separate grief from evidence. Could have been left behind before the trip, Hollis said gruffly, though his tone lacked conviction. No, Claire said firmly. She wore them that morning. I remember the weight of that memory pressed into her chest until it was almost unbearable. By evening, forensic teams had swarmed the site. They bagged soil samples, scraped rust, documented every inch of the wreckage. Claire hovered near the bus, taking notes, asking questions. One technician, a young woman with steady hands, emerged from inside carrying a small cloth object sealed in plastic. A backpack, she said. Claire leaned closer. The fabric was dark blue, embroidered with stars. Its zipper hung open, the contents long rotted away, but on the front pocket, stitched in silver thread, were initials. S.H. Sarah Harper. One of the twins. Claire swallowed hard. The evidence was undeniable now. The students had been inside the bus when it was buried. But why? That night, Claire returned to her motel. She laid the shoe and the backpack photographs across the bedspread, staring at them until her vision blurred. Questions piled faster than answers. Who buried the bus? Why hide it rather than destroy it? Where were the bodies? She knew the town would be buzzing with rumors already. Old wounds would reopen, and someone, somewhere, would feel the pressure of truth closing in. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, low and hurried. You need to stop digging. Some things are meant to stay buried. Click. The line went dead. Claire sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, the motel room eerily silent. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt a flicker of fear crawl down her spine. The next morning, Hollis called her to the station. A deputy had recovered the old VHS tape from the 1998 gas station. They set up a dusty player in the evidence room, the machine whirring to life. Static filled the screen before resolving into grainy black and white footage. The timestamp read 11:47 a.m. April 12th, 1998. The school bus pulled into frame, its shape unmistakable even through the distortion. Claire leaned forward, breath shallow. The driver stepped out to pump gas. Students milled about, laughing, shoving each other playfully. Emma was there, curly hair bouncing, rainbow shoes visible even in monochrome. Sarah and Susan Harper shared a soda, sipping through twin straws. For one precious minute, they were alive again. Then, on the far edge of the frame, Claire noticed something. A second vehicle, a dark pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot, its windows tinted. The driver remained inside, watching. Claire pointed. Who's that? Hollis squinted. Never identified. Didn't seem important back then. Someone followed them, Claire whispered. The tape ended shortly after the bus pulled away, heading north. The pickup remained. Claire's pulse raced. This was it. A lead ignored, a detail buried in the noise of panic. Whoever drove that truck knew what happened next. And after last night's call, Claire had the sinking feeling that the driver, or someone connected, was still watching. That evening, the motel phone rang again. This time, she didn't answer. She let it ring, staring at the evidence spread across her bed. The bus fragments, Emma's shoe, Sarah's backpack, the shadow of a truck on old footage. The story was forming, but the ending was still hidden in darkness, and in Meadowbrook, Secrets never stayed buried forever. The address was scrawled in faded ink on the margin of an old police report. Samuel J. Harlan, long-haul trucker, witnessed bus turning eastbound near abandoned ranch. The file noted he'd been drinking, that his account was unreliable. But Claire had learned over the years that discarded witnesses often carried truths too inconvenient for clean narratives. She drove east that morning, past cracked fields and barbed wire fences sagging under decades of rust. The air carried a dry chill. The house stood at the end of a dirt road, a sagging porch, windows patched with cardboard, a yard littered with rusting car parts. A mangy dog barked half-heartedly, then slunk back beneath a truck bed. Claire knocked. After a long pause, the door creaked open. An old man peered out, gray beard tangled, eyes sharp despite the years. His voice was rough. "Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying." "Mr. Harlan?" Claire asked. "Depends who's asking." She held up her badge. "Detective Claire Whitman, Texas Rangers. I want to talk about April 12th, 1998. The door began to close, but she pressed gently against it. The day the Meadowbrook bus disappeared. His hand froze on the knob. Slowly, he opened the door wider. "Been a long time since anyone asked me about that. May I come in?" The living room smelled of tobacco and dust. Old photographs of trucks lined the walls, and a muted television flickered in the corner. Harlan lowered himself into a recliner, gesturing to the sagging couch. "You were driving on Highway 281 that day," Claire began. "You told deputies you saw the bus." His jaw worked side to side. "That's what I said." "Nobody believed me. I want to hear it again." In your own words, Harlan rubbed his temples. "It was around noon. I'd been on the road since dawn, heading south with a load of lumber. Stopped at a diner, had a couple beers with lunch." He glanced at her. "That's why they said I was unreliable. Fair enough. But I know what I saw." Claire leaned forward. "Go on." "The bus passed me heading north. Bright as day. Kids waving out the windows. Thought nothing of it. But a few miles later, I saw it again. Slowed down. Turned off onto a dirt road that led to the old Caldwell Ranch. Nobody lived there then. Place had been empty for years. Are you sure it was the same bus?" Harlan nodded firmly. "Same district number on the side. Same driver." He looked nervous. Kept glancing in the mirror. Claire scribbled notes. "Did you see anyone else?" His eyes flicked away. "Yeah, a black pickup followed close behind. Dark windows. Didn't look like no ordinary truck. Military, maybe." A chill rippled through her. The pickup again. "What happened next?" "I figured maybe it was some school outing. Didn't think much of it. But when I heard the news that night, I called it in. Deputies came, wrote it down, then shrugged me off. Said I was drunk. Said the bus never left the highway. After that, I shut my mouth." "Ain't worth the trouble." Claire's pen hovered above the page. "Why didn't you insist?" His laugh was bitter. "Lady, you don't know Meadowbrook. Folks there didn't want answers. They wanted closure." Big difference. She stared at him. Why would the bus turn toward an abandoned ranch? "Only one reason," he said quietly. "Because somebody wanted it hidden." After leaving, Claire drove straight to the Caldwell Ranch. The road was little more than 2 ruts carved into dry earth. Mesquite trees clawed at the sky, and weeds swallowed the fences. At the end stood the remains of a farmhouse, its roof caved, windows shattered. A barn leaned dangerously, its door hanging by one hinge. She parked and stepped out, boots crunching gravel. The silence was absolute, broken only by the creak of the barn in the wind. The ground was uneven, patches of dirt darker than others. She crouched, brushing soil with her fingers. Recently disturbed? Hard to say. Her phone buzzed. A message from Hollis. "Lab confirmed paint chips equals school bus enamel. Same type used in 1998. It's ours." Claire's stomach tightened. She circled the barn. Inside, sunlight cut through slats, illuminating piles of rotting hay. Rusted tools lay scattered. In one corner, a half-buried tire jutted from the dirt. She knelt, brushing away soil until her hand trembled. It was not just a tire. It was the remains of a wheel rim, painted faint yellow. Her breath caught. This was another piece of the bus. The ranch wasn't just a passing landmark. It was part of the burial ground. Back at the motel that evening, Claire spread out her notes. Harlan's testimony, the VHS showing the pickup, the bus fragments, the shoe, the backpack. The connections deepened. Bus last seen heading north. Witness placed it turning east. Buried fragments found east of the highway. Pickup truck present both times. The pattern was undeniable, but one question gnawed at her. Why bury the bus in pieces? Why scatter it between the construction site and the ranch? She was still staring at the map when a knock rattled her door. She froze. Checked the peephole. A slip of paper had been tucked beneath the frame. She opened the door cautiously. The hallway was empty. The paper bore a single sentence, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "Stop looking at the ranch." Her hand shook as she folded it. Whoever had been calling her was watching her every move. The next day, Claire returned to the sheriff's office. Hollis was reviewing files, his brow furrowed. "I spoke with Sam Harlan," she said. His expression soured. "That drunk again? We wasted hours on his nonsense back then." It wasn't nonsense. He saw the bus turn toward Caldwell Ranch. "And I found another wheel buried near the barn." Hollis's eyes widened. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, "If that's true, it means the bus was dismantled. Deliberately, exactly. Someone didn't just want to hide it. They wanted to scatter it so no one would ever find the whole story." He rubbed his jaw. "Who'd go through that much trouble?" "That's what we're going to find out," Claire said. She handed him the note left at her door. His lips pressed thin. "Someone's rattled you," he said. "Which means you're close." That evening, Claire drove back to the ranch alone. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red. She parked near the barn and sat in silence, letting the dusk settle. Something about the place felt wrong. She walked slowly toward the farmhouse. Floorboards groaned under her weight, the smell of mildew thick. She swept her flashlight across the walls. Graffiti, old beer cans, nests of rodents. Teenagers had likely used the place for decades, but beneath the floorboards, she swore she heard something, a hollow echo, as though space existed below. Dropping to her knees, she pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Then, a faint creak. She jerked back, heart hammering. There was a basement, a hidden one. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that whatever was buried there was not meant to be found. The farmhouse sagged against the horizon, its silhouette jagged against the rising moon. Claire stood at the threshold, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. The air smelled of rot and old timber. She crouched near the living room floorboards, where she had heard the hollow sound earlier. Her boots scraped softly against the planks. She pressed again, this time firmly with her palm. A distinct echo reverberated beneath. There was definitely a void under the house. Claire scanned the room. Dust blanketed every corner. In the far wall, half hidden behind a collapsed cabinet, she noticed a square outline in the floorboards. A hatch. Her pulse quickened. She cleared the debris, tugging the cabinet aside with effort. The hatch was reinforced with an iron handle, rusted but intact. She pulled. The wood shrieked as it lifted. A gust of stale air escaped, carrying with it a smell that stiffened her spine. Mildew, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. Blood. The beam of her flashlight revealed a wooden staircase descending into darkness. Every instinct told her to call for backup, to wait until daylight. But she knew this ranch had been left untouched for years. Whoever left the note knew she'd been here already. Time was against her. She gripped the handle of her sidearm, switched the flashlight to her other hand, and descended. Each step moaned under her weight. The air grew heavier, clinging to her skin. When she reached the bottom, the beam of light revealed a concrete chamber, surprisingly large, its walls sweating moisture. And along those walls, symbols, dozens of them, carved into the concrete. Circles intersected with lines, rough crosses, spirals that looped endlessly inward. Some had been smeared with what looked like old paint, or dried blood. Claire's throat tightened. At the far end of the room sat a row of wooden benches, the kind found in old churches. Dust coated them, except for the middle one, where faint impressions suggested it had been used more recently. Beside it, she spotted something half buried in the dirt floor, a scrap of fabric. She crouched and pulled it free. It was a sleeve from a child's sweatshirt, faded red, the fabric stiff with age. Her breath caught. 16 years lost, and here, in her hand, a remnant of one of those children. A sudden noise froze her, a thump from above. The floorboards groaned. Someone was in the farmhouse. She killed the flashlight instantly, crouching low, gun drawn. Darkness enveloped her. Footsteps creaked across the floor, slow, deliberate. Her chest tightened, every nerve screaming to stay silent. The hatch above scraped open. A faint glow spilled down. The beam of another flashlight. "Check the basement," a man's voice muttered. Claire's grip on her weapon tightened. Another set of footsteps joined. Heavy boots on wood. Then, a face appeared at the top of the stairs, haloed by the light. A man, broad-shouldered, baseball cap pulled low. He descended slowly, flashlight sweeping. Claire stayed still, crouched in the shadows near the benches. The man's beam caught the symbols on the walls, the sleeve clutched in her hand. He muttered something she couldn't hear, as though confirming their presence. Then his light passed dangerously close to her. Her breath stilled, but before he could turn back, a second voice called from above. "Hurry up. We don't have time." The man hesitated, then cursed under his breath. He climbed back up the stairs. The hatch slammed shut. Silence swallowed the chamber again. Claire exhaled shakily, every muscle trembling. She stayed crouched for several minutes, listening until the creak of footsteps above faded. Then she switched her flashlight back on. She swept the beam across the chamber once more, and froze. Because on the far wall, scrawled above the benches in faded red paint, were words that made her skin crawl. "We are still waiting." By the time she emerged from the basement, the farmhouse was empty. Whoever had been there left no trace but boot prints in the dust. She drove back into town, headlights slicing the darkness. At the motel, she secured the sweatshirt sleeve in an evidence bag, then collapsed on the bed. Sleep did not come. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the symbols, the benches, the words on the wall. When dawn broke, she called Hollis. "I found a basement under the Caldwell house," she said. Her voice was flat from exhaustion. Symbols carved into the walls. Benches. And this? She told him about the sweatshirt sleeve. Hollis cursed softly. "That's enough to reopen the whole case officially. We'll get a team out there today." "There's more," Claire said quietly. She told him about the men, the flashlights, the words. A heavy silence followed. "Then you're not the only one digging into this. Somebody's watching that ranch, and they're not happy by noon. Crime scene tape surrounded the Caldwell Ranch. Forensics teams descended into the basement, photographing every inch." Hollis joined Claire at the site, his jaw tight. "What do you think this place was?" he asked. "A meeting room. Rituals, maybe. Look at the benches, the symbols. Somebody brought those kids here, but why dismantle the bus? Why scatter the pieces? Claire studied the symbols again, because the bus itself was evidence. Too big to hide whole. But scatter it in pieces, bury them separately, and you erase the trail. All that remains is this, she gestured to the wall. A shrine. One of the forensics techs interrupted. Detective Whitman? We found something else. They led her to a corner where the dirt floor had been disturbed. Shovels scraped, pulling up earth until a wooden box emerged. Inside were Polaroid photographs. Claire's hands shook as she flipped through them. Children's faces. 25 in total, grainy and blurred, but each child wore the Meadowbrook school uniform. Their expressions were blank, eyes glassy, as though they had been posed. In the final photograph, the children were seated on those very benches, the symbols looming behind them. Claire's heart dropped. They had been here. All of them. That night, Claire sat in the sheriff's office conference room. The Polaroids spread across the table. Hollis paced behind her, muttering curses under his breath. These were taken in the basement. No doubt about it, but look closer, Claire said. She pointed at the final photograph. Notice the date stamp? April 12th, 1998. Same day the bus vanished. Hollis leaned closer. So they were alive when they got here. Alive, together, and then gone. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Next time, we take more than photographs. Her blood turned to ice. Whoever had been in that basement wasn't finished. The photographs wouldn't leave her mind. 25 children sitting shoulder to shoulder on benches, eyes vacant, symbols looming above. A whole class captured in a moment of eerie silence. Claire laid them out across her motel desk like puzzle pieces. She studied their faces. Fear wasn't what she saw. It was emptiness, as if something had drained them before the camera ever clicked. She tried to match the faces with the names from the missing person reports. Kyle Porter, Maria Gonzalez, Eddie Chang, Jessica Miles. She whispered them under her breath, as though reciting a prayer. When she reached the last photo, the group posed together, she noticed something she had missed before. In the corner of the frame, partly cut off, was the edge of a hand, an adult's. Thick fingers, a silver ring glinting. Someone had been standing close when the picture was taken, someone controlling it all. She met Hollis at the sheriff's office that morning. His face looked older than the day before. Lines deepened, his shirt wrinkled from lack of sleep. We've identified the children, he said, tapping the Polaroids. Every one of them belongs to the Meadowbrook 25. Parents confirmed, but this... He pointed to the symbols. I've never seen anything like it. I have, Claire said. She spread out the copies of crime scene photos from old cases she had studied as a cadet. Markings used by small cults in Texas during the late 80s and early 90s. Circles intersected by crosses. Spirals meant to represent the passage. Cults, Hollis muttered. That's what we're dealing with? Not just any, Claire said. These were local. Groups that flared up, then vanished without trace. They called themselves fellowships, brotherhoods, assemblies. Always small, always secretive. But their symbols? They matched these. She tapped the Polaroids. Hollis rubbed the back of his neck. So what? Meadowbrook had its own? Claire's voice dropped. Looks that way. And if 25 children ended up in their hands, it wasn't an accident. To find answers, she went where cults left their faintest footprints. The county records office. The building was quiet, its fluorescent lights humming faintly as she signed the logbook and descended into the archives. She spent hours combing through property deeds, church charters, and tax records. Then she found it. A small filing slip from 1985. Assembly of the Covenant. Non-denominational fellowship, registered at Caldwell Ranch. Her pulse quickened. The ranch had been their base long before the bus vanished. The file was thin, barely 3 pages. The fellowship listed a dozen members, all with Meadowbrook addresses. Their stated purpose: community gatherings, spiritual study. But in the margins, a clerk had scribbled, "Closed 1987, leadership dissolved, assets liquidated, yet someone had resurrected it in 1998. Claire copied the names. 3 stood out. Richard Sloan, school board president in the 90s. Pastor William Harker, First Baptist Church, Meadowbrook. Mayor Thomas Briggs. Prominent men, respected men, and every one of them had been in positions of influence when the children disappeared. She drove back to Meadowbrook as evening fell, her mind racing. The town looked the same as ever. Quiet streets, the diner lit warm, children riding bicycles near the park. Ordinary. But under the surface, something rotten had always been there. Claire stopped at the diner, ordered coffee, and slid into a booth. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, recognized her badge. "You're here about the kids, aren't you?" she asked softly, pouring the coffee. Claire nodded. "What do you remember?" The woman sighed. "I remember the fear. Parents locking their doors, folks whispering about devils and cults. But when you asked the wrong questions, the mayor told you to hush. Said the Rangers had it in hand, but the Rangers never came, did they?" Claire's stomach sank. "Who told you not to ask questions?" "The pastor," she said. "Harker. He said evil didn't grow if you didn't feed it." She shook her head. Funny how people like him never had to pay. Later, Claire drove past the church. It stood at the edge of town, its steeple sharp against the night sky. The lot was empty, but a faint light glowed in the pastor's office window. She parked and sat in the dark, watching. At 9 p.m., the light clicked off. A shadow moved across the window, then disappeared. Claire gripped the wheel tighter. Pastor Harker had retired years ago, yet someone still used that office. Her phone buzzed with another message. "You're not looking for children anymore. You're looking for ghosts." She swallowed hard, staring at the glow fading from the church. Whoever was sending those messages knew exactly where she was. The next morning, she and Hollis met again at the office. She spread out the fellowship file. "They called themselves the Assembly of the Covenant," she said. "Founded at Caldwell Ranch. Dissolved in '87. But the same men were in power when the bus vanished." Hollis scanned the names, his face pale. Briggs. Sloan Harker. Those men were pillars of this town. They were more than that. They had authority to silence investigations. They could bury witnesses, redirect suspicion. The perfect cover. "But they're all dead now," Hollis said. Claire shook her head. "Not all. Richard Sloan's son is alive. So is Harker's nephew. Legacies don't vanish, they adapt. And if the ranch was reopened in 1998, someone carried the torch." That afternoon, Claire visited the Meadowbrook Historical Society, a small brick building crammed with photos and yearbooks. The curator, a frail man with trembling hands, welcomed her inside. She asked about the fellowship. He hesitated, glancing toward the door. "I shouldn't talk about that," he whispered. "Why not?" "Because people who didn't stay in Meadowbrook long. Or alive." Claire leaned closer. "Please, this is the only way I'll find out what happened to those children." The old man exhaled. They believed in the covenant of renewal, that the world was sick and innocence could cure it. They wanted vessels, pure souls, children. They called them the offering. Claire's stomach clenched. And the Meadowbrook 25? They were chosen. Taken as a group to show the covenant's power, his voice shook. They said the offering would keep the town safe for another generation. Her hands trembled as she wrote. "Safe from what?" "Safe from change," he whispered. "Safe from outsiders. Safe from dying towns and empty streets." They thought if they gave up the children, Meadowbrook would endure. Claire drove back to the ranch at dusk. She parked near the barn and sat in silence, staring at the fields. The town had sacrificed its children to keep itself alive, and someone had guarded that secret for 16 years. She thought of the note left at her door, the voices in the basement, the shadow in the church window. They weren't gone. The covenant was still here, watching, waiting. The morning heat pressed against the motel window, a shimmer of haze rolling over the asphalt lot. Claire sat at the desk, notes scattered before her. A web was forming. Caldwell Ranch, the Assembly of the Covenant, men of influence. But webs only held weight if you tugged the threads. She circled 3 names in her notebook. Sloan. Harker Briggs, all dead. But their families weren't. The Sloan house sat on a hill at the edge of Meadowbrook, an aging colonial with ivy clawing up its brick. The current patriarch, David Sloan, was Richard's son. Claire parked at the curb, scanning the pristine lawn, the manicured hedges. She knocked. The man who opened the door was in his 50s, with the polished look of someone who had never known want. His smile was forced when he saw the badge. "Detective, what brings you here?" "I'd like to ask about your father, Richard Sloan." His smile thinned. "Dad's been gone 10 years. "I know, but his name appears in old fellowship records tied to Caldwell Ranch." His eyes hardened. The assembly was a church group. Bible study, potlucks. Nothing more. Claire held his gaze. Children vanished while he was on the school board. 25 of them. You can understand my interest. His hand tightened on the door frame. "You dig in dirt long enough, you'll choke on it." "My father built this town. Don't slander his name." "I'm not slandering," she said calmly. "I'm investigating." "Did he ever mention the covenant of renewal?" Something flickered in his eyes, gone as quickly as it came. "No." He stepped back, pushing the door. "This conversation's over." The door slammed in her face. She tried the Harker residence next. Pastor Harker had died, but his nephew Matthew ran the church now. She found him in the sanctuary, sweeping the aisle. A tall man with thinning hair, his collar white against black shirt. "Pastor Harker," she called. He looked up, cautious. "Yes?" She approached, showing her badge. "Detective Whitman. I'm investigating the Meadowbrook 25. His face paled. "That tragedy. I was a teenager then. My uncle spoke of it often, said it was the devil's work. Your uncle's name is on the Assembly of the Covenant records." Matthew stiffened. The assembly was a prayer circle. Nothing more. Symbols carved into concrete basements say otherwise. The broom handle trembled in his grip. "I don't know what you're implying, but my uncle devoted his life to God. Don't you dare twist that. Then explain this." She pulled a Polaroid from her folder. The children seated in the ranch basement. His eyes darted to it. His lips parted. "Where did you—" He stopped himself, closing his mouth tight. "You recognize it," Claire pressed. He turned away. "I have work to do." "Pastor Harker," but he was already striding down the aisle, broom clattering against the pews. The Briggs family proved harder. Mayor Thomas Briggs had left behind only a widow, Evelyn, who lived in a small bungalow on the far side of town. Claire found her in the garden, kneeling among wilting roses. "Mrs. Briggs?" Claire asked. The woman looked up. Her hands trembled as she set down her shears. "Yes?" Claire showed her badge. "I need to talk about your husband. About the assembly." The color drained from Evelyn's face. She wiped dirt from her palms, though they still shook. "I've been waiting for this." Claire blinked. "Waiting?" Evelyn nodded, eyes glistening. 16 years I've kept quiet. They said if I spoke, I'd join the children." Her voice cracked. "But I can't carry it anymore." Claire crouched beside her. "Tell me." They believed the covenant would save Meadowbrook. Tom said it was just a ritual, a performance. He swore the children would come home, but they didn't. And after that night, he was never the same, always looking over his shoulder, drinking, talking in his sleep. What did he say? She swallowed. He said the offering failed, that the bus was cursed, and that one day it would return. Claire's heart pounded. Return how? But before Evelyn could answer, a car engine roared nearby. A black pickup slowed in front of the bungalow, windows tinted dark. It idled for a moment, then sped away. Evelyn flinched, clutching Claire's arm. They're watching. They always watch. That night, Claire drove the outskirts of town, replaying Evelyn's words. The offering failed. The bus was cursed. It will return. The idea gnawed at her. What did it mean for an offering to fail? If the children had been sacrificed, how could it fail? She pulled over near the abandoned railroad tracks, killing the engine. Silence pressed close. In her notebook she wrote, Assembly of the Covenant, children equals offering, failed ritual, bus cursed. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then a sound broke the stillness. Crunch. Gravel shifting behind her car. Her hand darted to her weapon. She stepped out, scanning with her flashlight. A shadow moved between the trees. Stop! She shouted. The beam caught a figure. Hood pulled low, face obscured. The person froze, then bolted into the brush. Claire sprinted after, branches whipping her arms. Her lungs burned as she chased the figure through the dark, until suddenly they vanished into the thicket. She stopped, panting. Silence. Then she saw it. Pinned to a tree with a rusted nail was another Polaroid. Not of the past, of her. The photo showed her car outside Evelyn Briggs's house, taken hours earlier. On the back, scrawled in jagged ink, Your offering begins now. Back at the motel, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, the Polaroid trembling in her hand. She had stirred the nest. Families who had buried the covenant for decades were rattled, and someone, maybe many, still believed. The Meadowbrook 25 had vanished in one offering. Now the covenant had its eyes on her. Rain lashed the windows of the sheriff's office, blurring the world outside into streaks of gray. Claire sat at the long oak table in the records room, the Polaroid of herself pinned above the spread of files. Her reflection stared back from the glossy paper, caught mid-step beside Evelyn Briggs's garden. She wasn't just investigating anymore. She was marked. Hollis entered carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He set one before her and leaned heavily against the chair across from her. His eyes scanned the evidence board they had pieced together overnight. Photographs of the basement symbols, the Polaroids of the children, the names of the assembly members. You're shaking up hornets, he muttered. These families aren't going to sit quiet while you drag their dead back into the light. Claire wrapped her hands around the mug, though the heat barely reached her fingers. Evelyn Briggs said the offering failed, that the bus was cursed. What did she mean? Hollis's face darkened. Old rumors. Some said the covenant tried rituals before. Small things, livestock, strays. They believed in purification through sacrifice. When the bus vanished, folks whispered it wasn't just a kidnapping. It was the big one. But if Evelyn's right, then something went wrong, Claire finished. He nodded. And they've been covering it ever since. Claire returned to the Caldwell Ranch that afternoon, rain easing to a drizzle. She walked the field beyond the barn, mud sucking at her boots. Something about Evelyn's words gnawed at her. The bus will return. The offering hadn't been successful. But why scatter the bus, bury its parts? Unless... She crouched near a ditch where rainwater pooled. Her eyes caught the shimmer of metal half buried in the mud. She dug carefully, pulling free a corroded fragment of glass, curved and tinted. A window. She bagged it, heart pounding. The land was still bleeding pieces of that day. At the motel that night, she spread everything across the bed. Polaroids, soil samples, notes. She traced the timeline again. Morning, students boarded bus. Noon. Gas station footage. Afternoon. Witness saw bus turn toward ranch, followed by black pickup. Evening. Bus and children vanish. The Polaroids were time-stamped that same day, which meant the children had been alive inside that basement. But what happened after? She flipped one Polaroid again. The group shot. Something in the background nagged her. She zoomed with her phone camera until the grain resolved into a faint shape. A second doorway, partially hidden behind a bench. The basement had more than one room. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't found the whole picture. The next morning she brought her theory to Hollis. "There's a hidden chamber in the ranch basement," she said. "Look here." She pointed at the blown-up corner of the Polaroid. Hollis studied it, his jaw tightening. "So you think there's more underground?" "I know there is." "And whatever happened to the children, that's where we'll find it." He hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. I'll get a team with ground radar by afternoon." They were back at Caldwell Ranch. The crew swept the basement floor with equipment, the radar pulsing lines across the screen. "There," one tech said, pointing. "Hollow space." Runs deeper. Behind the south wall, Claire's pulse quickened. They brought in tools, chisels, and hammers. Concrete cracked under each strike, dust choking the air. Then, with a final blow, a slab gave way, revealing a narrow tunnel descending into blackness. The air that escaped was damp and sour, tinged with decay. Claire clicked on her flashlight and entered first. The tunnel walls were raw earth, reinforced by wooden beams long rotted. The passage curved downward until it opened into another chamber. She froze at the threshold. Dozens of wooden chairs circled the room, smaller than the benches, each facing inward. At the center was a stone slab, stained dark, and against the far wall, chains. Rust had eaten them, but the cuffs still hung from bolts, too small for adult wrists. Claire's throat closed. The Polaroids had shown the children seated, but this room had been for something else. A deputy called out, "Detective?" "Over here," she turned. He pointed at a stack of boxes crumbling in one corner. Inside were binders, pages yellowed and curling. She lifted one carefully. Handwritten notes filled the pages. April 12th, 1998. The offering commenced. 25 chosen, purity intact. April 13th. The vessel rejected them. Signs of corruption. The passage remains closed. April 14th. Dissolution. The children must be scattered. Their vessel must be buried. Silence is covenant. Claire's stomach churned. "The vessel?" she whispered. "The bus." It hadn't carried them to salvation. It had been the altar itself. That night she pored over the journals back at the station. Hollis paced while she read aloud fragments. "They believed the bus was more than transport," she said. "It was the container for their ritual. When the offering failed, they dismantled it, buried the pieces to hide their shame." "And the kids?" Hollis asked quietly. Claire flipped to the last entry, words scrawled in frantic ink. "Some remained, marked, not whole. We sent them away." Her hand shook. "Some of them survived." Hollis stared. 16 years and no one saw them? "Not as children," Claire said softly. "Maybe as something else." The thought haunted her that night at the motel. If even one child had lived, where were they now? She dreamed of Emma, her cousin, seated on that bench, eyes hollow. She dreamed of her calling her name, voice echoing in the tunnels. Claire woke drenched in sweat. Her phone buzzed. Another message. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a photo, a Polaroid taken just hours earlier, of her motel room door. On the back, scrawled in the same jagged ink, "They came back once. They can come back again." The morning came harsh and bright, the motel curtains failing to block the sharp rays of Texas sun. Claire sat on the bed, the newest Polaroid trembling in her hands. Someone had stood outside her room in the dead of night, close enough to photograph the door. Her skin prickled. They weren't just watching her now. They were circling. She stuffed the photo into her case file, splashed cold water on her face, and drove to the sheriff's office. Hollis was already there, nursing his second coffee. "They're playing with you," he muttered when she showed him the Polaroid, "trying to spook you off." "They want me to stop," Claire said, "which means I'm close." She spread the Covenant journals across the table. "Look at this entry again. Some remained, marked, not whole. We sent them away." Hollis frowned. If even one of those kids survived, why haven't we heard from them? Why no trace? Maybe they didn't come back here. Maybe they were sent away under new names, new lives, or maybe, she hesitated, maybe they were changed. Changed how? She shook her head. "I don't know yet." Claire spent the afternoon at the town library, combing through census records, yearbooks, and hospital archives. She focused on the years after 1998, looking for anomalies. Children who appeared suddenly, families who took in wards without adoption papers. By dusk, one name surfaced again and again: Daniel Cooper. He appeared in Meadowbrook's school records in 2000, listed as a foster child. No prior documentation, no birth certificate. Teachers described him as quiet, withdrawn, prone to night terrors. Claire pulled the file photograph. Her heart jolted. Daniel's eyes were hollow, glassy, like the children in the Polaroids. She whispered the name under her breath, as if testing it. Daniel Cooper. Was he one of the 25s? The Cooper's house sat on the far edge of town, a sagging single story with a rusted swing set out front. Claire parked at the curb, scanning the property. A curtain twitched. She knocked. After a moment, a man in his 30s opened the door. Tall, thin, hair cropped short. His face was pale, but his eyes were the same hollow gray as in the file. "Daniel Cooper," Claire asked. He hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Detective Claire Whitman. I'm investigating the Meadowbrook 25. His jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be here. I need to know where you came from." "I came from nowhere," he snapped. His eyes darted past her to the street. "You don't understand. They'll see you. They'll hear us." "Who?" "The ones who never left." Her pulse quickened. "Daniel, were you on the bus?" He flinched. "I can help you," she pressed. "Please, tell me." For a long moment, he stared at her, his face pale, trembling. Then he whispered, "I was 12. I remember the benches, the chanting, the lights went out. When I woke up, I wasn't the same." Her chest tightened. "Not the same how?" "They marked us." His voice cracked. "Some didn't wake at all. Some changed. I don't sleep without seeing them." He pressed a hand to his temple. "I hear them even now." Claire swallowed. "Where are the others?" His eyes filled with terror. "Gone, buried in the dark. Don't make me say more. Please, they'll come if I speak." Suddenly, headlights flared outside, a black pickup slowing at the curb. Daniel's face drained of color. "They're here." He slammed the door shut. Claire pounded once. "Daniel!" No answer. The pickup idled, its tinted windows staring at her like eyes. Then, slowly, it rolled away. Claire stood frozen on the porch, heart pounding. Daniel Cooper was alive. One of the 25s, and someone out there was making sure he stayed silent. Back at the motel, she pieced it together. Daniel appeared in town records 2 years after the disappearance. He remembered the basement, the chanting, the mark. He was terrified, monitored, silenced. If one child had been returned, others might have been too. Not as themselves, but as something the Covenant had reshaped. Her phone buzzed. A new message. This time it wasn't Polaroid film. It was a digital photo. Daniel Cooper, standing at his window, staring out. The timestamp, 2 minutes ago. Claire's breath hitched. Whoever was watching her was watching him too. The next day, she tried to reach Daniel again. The house was silent, curtains drawn. She knocked, called his name. No answer. She circled to the back. The screen door hung open, creaking. Inside, the living room was a mess. Furniture overturned, a lamp smashed. The air smelled of sweat and panic. "Daniel?" she called softly. Silence. Then she saw it on the floor, a photograph. She knelt, picking it up. A Polaroid, edges curled. It showed Daniel as a boy, sitting on the bench in the basement, his expression hollow. Behind him, Emma. Claire's vision blurred. Her cousin's face, alive in that underground chamber, her eyes emptied of light. The photo slipped in her trembling hand. Daniel Cooper was gone. Taken. Again. The Coopers' living room looked like a storm had torn through it. Claire stood amid the wreckage, her pulse roaring in her ears. Daniel Cooper was gone. Again. The half-drunk glass of water still sat on the coffee table, condensation sliding down its side. The TV flickered blue, humming with static. It hadn't been a careful abduction. It had been fast, chaotic, like a hand snatching prey from a trap. She forced herself to steady. She was a detective. She had to process the scene. The back door had been forced outward, not inward. They hadn't broken in. Daniel had run. They'd dragged him out. On the kitchen floor, a trail of muddy boot prints crossed the linoleum, large, heavy, no attempt to disguise them. And there, beneath the table, something half-torn. A scrap of cloth, black canvas, frayed edge, like from a uniform. Claire photographed everything, her hands trembling, then called Hollis. "They took him," she said, voice raw. "Slow down." "Who?" "I don't know. But they didn't care if I found the scene. They wanted me to know." By the time Hollis arrived, dawn was bleeding pale light across the horizon. He surveyed the wreckage, jaw tight. "You sure this isn't him just running?" Claire shoved the Polaroid into his hand, the one showing Daniel in the basement as a boy. Hollis stared at it, his weathered face draining of color. "This can't be real." "It is," Claire said. "He was one of them. One of the Meadowbrook 25s, and they came back for him." Hollis set the photo down like it might burn him. "Why now? 16 years later?" "Because I stirred it up. Because I asked questions they don't want answered. And because Daniel remembered they combed the yard with flashlights until the sun was fully up." The boot prints led across the grass, through a broken section of fence, and into the woods behind the house. The trail ended at tire marks, wide treads, heavy vehicle. A van, maybe. "They knew the ground," Hollis muttered. "They knew how to get him out fast." Claire crouched, touching the churned earth where the tires had spun deep. This wasn't sloppy. This was practiced. "They've done this before," Hollis finished grimly. At the station, Claire spread out the evidence. The Covenant journals, the Polaroids, the school record of Daniel Cooper, the photograph of Emma in the basement. The room felt colder with it all together, as if the evidence itself exhaled something malignant. "They took 25 kids in 1998, Claire said quietly, "and they didn't stop." Daniel proves that Hollis rubbed his temples. If they're still active, they're operating under everyone's nose. "This whole damn town." He stopped, eyes narrowing. "Wait. Look at the school record again. Daniel enrolled in 2000. Foster system signed off on it. How the hell did he get into the system without a birth certificate?" Claire leaned closer. The paperwork had been signed by Pastor Franklin, the same name she'd seen scribbled in the Covenant journals. Her stomach lurched. "Hollis, the church. It's not just history. They're still in it." That evening, Claire parked across from the Meadowbrook Baptist Church. The brick facade looked harmless in twilight, the white steeple reaching politely into the sky. But the parking lot was full. Through the stained glass windows, she saw shadows moving, rows of heads bowed. She slipped inside, blending with the stragglers. Pastor Franklin stood at the pulpit, his voice smooth, commanding. We are chosen, brothers and sisters. Chosen to carry forth what others abandoned, to be guardians of the light, to prepare the children for what's to come.